Bolsonaro, a pro-American leader, was replaced, to the Biden administration's cheering, with an anti-American radical Lula. And there is corruption likewise in the Lula government. In February, Lula allowed 2 of Iran's most advanced warships to dock in the port of Rio de Janeiro. The United States opposed that act, at least formally. In fact, the United States sanctioned those ships with what are supposed to be powerful designations, and yet it happened. I believe the Lula government's corruption played a significant role in their decision to ignore the Biden administration and allow the docking. Do you agree with that assessment? And has the Biden administration enforced any sanctions related to that instance, and in particular to the Brazilians providing material support to the Iranian ships?
The administration engaged our partners throughout the hemisphere, and we're very pleased that the Iranian ships were not able to dock anywhere else. We're deeply disappointed that one of the 2 ships was able to dock in Brazil. The other
Okay, so you just saw that clip. And if that didn't get your blood boiling at least a little bit, I don't know what will. What you just watched is Senator Ted Cruz doing exactly what opposition lawmakers are supposed to do. Holding the executive branch accountable, asking hard questions, and refusing to accept non-answers. And what does the Biden State Department give him in return? Diplomatic doublespeak and a whole lot of, "I'd refer you to OFAC." Look, I'll be honest. I don't always agree with everything Ted Cruz says or does. But on this issue, he is absolutely right. And the frustration you see on his face is completely justified. We are talking about a convicted kleptocrat in Argentina, Iranian warships docking in Brazil, and a U.S. administration that had no problem sanctioning its enemies' enemies, but wouldn't touch its enemies' friends. That is a serious problem. Before we watch the full video, pay close attention to 2 things. The questions Ted Cruz asks, and the answers he never gets. Because that silence tells you everything. If U.S. foreign policy and real accountability matter to you, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a video. Let's get into it. Recorded after watching the full video.
Mr. Nichols, I'm deeply concerned that the Western Hemisphere is being overwhelmed by anti-Americanism, and that countries across the region are aligning themselves with our adversaries and our enemies. I'm deeply concerned that former U.S. allies are being replaced by leaders who are actively hostile to us and our interests, and that the Biden administration has chosen to embrace many of those leaders. President Biden warmly hosted Lula da Silva at the White House and called him a close friend. Lula is an anti-American Chavista who embraces the Chinese Communist Party, Vladimir Putin, and the Iranian regime. I'll note that President Biden has not extended the same courtesy to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and indeed the Biden White House has made clear that Israel's Prime Minister is not welcome in the Biden White House. Now, one of the very insidious ways that our adversaries and our enemies have infiltrated the region is through corruption. China, Russia, and Iran all exploit endemic corruption, including and especially corruption driven by left-wing movements to advance their geopolitical agendas. Congress, and specifically this committee, has recognized the importance of combating such corruption and have given you powerful tools, in particular under Section 7031C, sanctioned authorities. The Biden administration has used these sanctions repeatedly across the Western Hemisphere, but not, I'm dismayed to say, not against the left-wing, anti-American communists who are aligning with Russia and China and Iran. Quite the opposite. Again, the Biden administration has looked the other way at malign behavior from such actors. I want to ask you why that is, and I want to start in particular with Argentina. In Argentina, the federal judiciary found Cristina Fernandez, Argentina's former president and current vice president, guilty of overseeing and profiting from fraudulently issued government contracts to her associates for public works. According to the public record, the amounts we're talking about reach $1 billion. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison and given a lifetime ban on holding public office. Her current political role grants her immunity from jail, but I'm not aware of any such restriction placed by Congress on you from sanctioning her under Section 7031C. You sanctioned the sitting Paraguayan vice president last year. You've sanctioned former presidents in Panama and Ecuador. No one denies, and in fact, Argentina's courts have confirmed Cristina Fernandez is a kleptocrat. She has been indicted for obstructing investigations into Iranian terrorism. Why has the Biden administration not sanctioned her?
This administration has used the tools for sanctions, both visa and financial sanctions, repeatedly in numerous instances. You talk about sanctioning left-wing leaders. Certainly Nicaragua comes to mind. We've placed sanctions on scores and scores of officials from
Mr.
Nicaragua.
Nichols, my question concerned Argentina. Why have you not sanctioned Fernandez?
So the United States does not discuss pending sanctions actions, so I would not be able to discuss what we will or will not do with regard to
Well, you're refusing
any
to answer that, and I have to say this isn't changing. A year ago, I wrote Secretary Blinken about exactly this issue, sanctioning Cristina Fernandez under Section 7031C, and the State Department wrote back, and I'll quote what State said a year ago. Quote, President Biden and Secretary Blinken have made it a priority to fight corruption globally using all legal authorities available to them. That was nonsense then, and it's nonsense now. A year later, it is undisputed that she's a kleptocrat. Why is the Biden State Department giving her a pass?
We evaluate every case on its merits. We don't discuss specific cases before we take action. We have robust anti-corruption programs.
Does the state have an obligation to comply with Congress's oversight?
We
I'm
absolutely
asking you
do.
why you're not following the law, and your answer is we don't answer that question.
Our answer is we don't publicly discuss pending sanctions actions.
Well, it's not pending. It's been sitting there for a long time. All right, let's shift to another example, Brazil. Bolsonaro, a pro-American leader, was replaced, to the Biden administration's cheering, with an anti-American radical Lula. And there is corruption likewise in the Lula government. In February, Lula allowed 2 of Iran's most advanced warships to dock in the port of Rio de Janeiro. The United States opposed that act, at least formally. In fact, the United States sanctioned those ships with what are supposed to be powerful designations, and yet it happened. I believe the Lula government's corruption played a significant role in their decision to ignore the Biden administration and allow the docking. Do you agree with that assessment? And has the Biden administration enforced any sanctions related to that instance, and in particular to the Brazilians providing material support to the Iranian ships?
The administration engaged our partners throughout the hemisphere, and we're very pleased that the Iranian ships were not able to dock anywhere else. We're deeply disappointed that one of the 2 ships was able to dock in Brazil. The other was offshore. I would refer you to OFAC for any additional information on
Has the Biden
sanctions
administration sanctioned the Brazilian government led by Joe Biden's self-described good friend, the anti-American leftist Lula? Have you sanctioned the Brazilian government for violating U.S. law and allowing the Iranian ships to dock?
I would refer you to OFAC as to whether or not they've made a determination that action violated
You don't know
sanctions.
whether you've sanctioned Brazil?
I would refer you to OFAC.
Do you know?
I would refer you to OFAC.
Do you know the answer? That's a yes or no question. Do you know whether the Biden administration has sanctioned Brazil?
I am not aware of any sanctions with regard to that specific situation.
Nor am I, and that's the problem.
I believe Senator Cardin was here at the top of the hearing. Is that correct? Senator Cardin?
All right, we've watched the whole thing. Let me break down why this exchange matters, because there are layers here worth talking about. Start with the big picture. Ted Cruz is arguing that the Biden administration had a consistent pattern of looking the other way when left-wing governments in Latin America engaged in corruption and aligned with U.S. adversaries. And the evidence he's working with isn't fringe material. These are court rulings, documented port visits by sanctioned Iranian warships, and publicly available diplomatic records. The Cristina Fernandez situation really stood out. Argentina's own federal judiciary found Fernandez guilty of overseeing fraudulent government contracts worth around $1 billion. Argentina's courts, not Ted Cruz, not a Republican think tank. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison and banned from public office for life. And yet the Biden State Department couldn't bring itself to apply a visa sanction under Section 7031C, the exact tool Congress created for situations like this. When Ted Cruz presses the witness on it, the response is, "We don't discuss pending sanctions actions." Pending? Cruz had written to Secretary Blinken about this a full year earlier and got back a boilerplate line about fighting corruption globally. A year later, still nothing. At what point does pending become never? Then there's Brazil. 2 Iranian warships, already under U.S. sanctions, sailed into the port of Rio de Janeiro under Lula's watch. The same Lula that President Biden called a close friend and hosted at the White House. When Ted Cruz asks whether the Biden administration sanctioned Brazil for facilitating this, the State Department witness says, "I am not aware of any sanctions with regard to that specific situation." That is not diplomacy. That is a free pass. Now, to be fair, some people will say foreign policy is complicated, that sanctioning an ally creates blowback, that there are back-channel conversations we never see. Fine. But here's the thing. The Biden administration had no problem sanctioning scores of officials in Nicaragua. Ted Cruz even acknowledges that. So the willingness to use these tools clearly existed. It just wasn't applied equally. And that selective application is the heart of Cruz's argument. What impressed me about Ted Cruz in this hearing is that he came prepared. Specific statute numbers, specific court findings, specific dates. He referenced Section 7031C, with clear knowledge of how and when it applies. He pointed to the sanctioned Paraguayan vice president, former presidents in Panama and Ecuador, essentially saying, "You've done this before, you know how it works, so why not here?" And the answer he got was silence dressed up in bureaucratic language. The bigger takeaway from this whole video is that American foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere appeared to be driven more by political sympathy than by national interest. Left-leaning leaders got warm White House visits and diplomatic cover. Leaders aligned with American interests got the cold shoulder. And in Brazil's case, that diplomatic cover extended to a government that then allowed sanctioned Iranian warships to dock in one of its ports. You don't have to be a Republican to find that troubling. This is about whether America applies its own laws and values consistently. And in this hearing, the answer that came back was pretty clearly no. Ted Cruz did his job in that room. The State Department witness did not. And that gap between the seriousness of the questions and the emptiness of the answers is something worth paying attention to. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the Biden administration dropped the ball on Latin America? Is there a legitimate explanation for why Fernandez was never sanctioned? I want to hear what you think. Share this if you found it useful, and I'll see you in the next one.